All right, welcome in everyone. It's time for this week's Sports and Leisure History Look Back. We'll be looking back at history posts from the week of July 13th through July 19th. And we have a great show. We got some NBA off-season moves. We have some baseball. We have some golf. We have some track and field. We're chock full of discussions about stars and legends, if there's any one common theme throughout this week's podcast. As always, I'm Jeff Klein, and as always, I am joined by a history all-star and legend in his own right, Clayton Hamilton. How are you doing, Clayton?
At least in my own mind, maybe, Jeff, if not anywhere else.
My mind, too.
But, you can certainly say my opinions are all my own. That is certainly a good way to put it. I will not be ripping off things that I hear from Colin Cowherd and repeating them. Because one, I would never do that, and two, I would never listen.
Well, and I'm thankful for that.
Yeah.
There's a lot going on this week before we get into the history. We wrapped up World Cup today. Big shout out to Spain. I know they're celebrating out in Madrid, Barcelona, Valencia, all over Spain. Did you happen to catch the final?
I did. I watched the last of the games. I watched France and England the day prior, and now the World Cup is all done and dusted and wrapped and put back in the decoration box away for another 3 years. I will catch a little bit of the qualification the year prior. So, yeah.
Yeah, I'm curious to see how much of the excitement around this World Cup sticks. I mean, there's always that buzz after the World Cup, and everyone gets really into it, and then everyone kind of recedes back into not really following soccer or football, as it might be. And then 4 years from now, it'll be all the excitement again. So,
and we'll see if Nashville versus Orlando SC captures the imagination of the American public.
Yeah, I hope. I feel like the quality of more localized soccer is probably a little bit better than the World Cup. It just felt like there were a lot of always questions around the legitimacy of World Cup and the games and some of the acting and the fouls that weren't really fouls seemed a lot more excessive. Also, we're into the second half of the MLB season. We have the Home Run Derby, the All-Star Game. All-Star Game was a bit of a dud. It's still my favorite of the major sports All-Star games, but not all of them can be great. Sometimes you just don't get a great game. But I was really happy they went back to wearing their uniforms.
Yeah, they did that starting last year, which was great because there's nothing worse than those designs of American League or National League uniform, particularly when the broadcast is so poor. That they just cut away so much from what's going on in the field to show me a picture of somebody who's talking in the dugout. I don't need to see what Justin Verlander looks like when he's talking. One, I don't need to hear what he has to say during the game anyway. And if you're going to make me listen to that, don't make me look at him and miss pitches or be on a split screen. Stop. Whoever the director and the producer are, particularly for Fox Baseball, you are really bad at your job. You are not good. You do not know how to shoot a game in a compelling way. Stop. Just stop. Stop. Stop.
Yeah. I was thinking about all the interviews, and it's
awful.
I feel like, people tune in for the games, so it's not an awards show where we need to get all the cliche sort of answers and responses. I heard Justin Verlander you brought him up, and I thought this is such a generic answer. It kind of reminded me of the scene from Bull Durham, where Tim Robbins' character at the end makes it to the bigs, and he uses all the cliched answers and responses that he was taught in the minors. So it was just feels so cliche, and we're not really learning anything new. Let's just watch the game.
Yeah, there are two things that I never want to see again in any broadcast. One is an athlete or coach interview during the game. And the second thing I never want to see is a rotating camera shots of celebrities in the audience. I cannot look at Timothée Chalamet one more time. I was never a fan to begin with, and I've seen him way too much, and please don't ever show me his little rat beady looking eye face ever again. No more Chalamet.
Well, unfortunately, I think we're going to be stuck with more of Chalamet, more celebrities, and more of
Don't care.
all of that. Is there anything else on your radar this week? I know you're always diving into a lot of sports.
Yeah, huge disappointing day in the Tour de France today. Jonas Vingegaard crashed, broke his collarbone. He is out of the race. And now there is just about nothing stopping Tadej Pogačar in the last week from winning. He's over 5 minutes ahead of Remco Evenepoel. And unless there's a crash or food poisoning or something to that effect, it's going to be very difficult for anybody to catch Tadej, especially when they get into the Alps, which they are this week. But they will be climbing the legendary Alpe d'Huez. It is making its return to the Tour. So stage 19 should be a good one, just to see who can get to the top of Alpe d'Huez the fastest, which is always one of my favorite stages when they choose to include it in the program.
Well, that's great. I love getting these Tour de France updates. I don't follow it as closely as you do, but I enjoy hearing your enthusiasm, and also the high-level updates are always great to hear about. So I know we'll have another one next week, so I'm looking forward to that.
Absolutely. Next week will be the end. And a big shout out to Ryan Fox at the Open. Used to be the British Open, but now the Brits are very, well, it's the first big tournament, so it's going to be the Open. So just for all of you, the Open. Not to be confused with the U.S. Open. You don't have to qualify it. You're just the Open. Everybody else gets to be the Japan Open or the U.S. Open or any other Open, but you're just the Open Championships. But he had a walk-off birdie to win on the 18th, which is always exciting when you have a walk-off shot that wins a major. So congratulations, Ryan Fox.
Well, I do like the Open distinction opposed to the U.S. Open, because there's always that confusion if you're talking about tennis or you're talking about golf. So at least we avoid that.
Right, yes. But yes, it's no longer. Don't call it the British Open. You know how the Brits get about their definitions.
I do.
Can't be soccer. It's gotta be football. Can't be the British Open. It's gotta be the Open. Can't be a French fry. It's gotta be a crisp. Oh! I'm glad that England it did not win the World Cup. I'm very glad.
Well, we avoided the soccer versus football, or football rather, if it's
right.
British, arguments moving forward. So, okay, let's go ahead and jump in. But before we do, I just want to remind everyone to check us out on all the socials at Sports History SL. That's Sports History, the letter S, the letter L for Sports and Leisure. We're on Blue Sky, Instagram, Substack, X, and YouTube. And on Facebook, you can still find us at Sports and Leisure. Make sure you like, share, comment. We love our content being as engaging and as informative as possible. And you'll see these podcasts up and posted. And if you don't get a chance to catch the full episode, we post a lot of clips and excerpts throughout the week. So get on there, check it out, and we'll try to keep you informed on all the history throughout the year. All right, Clayton, let's jump into our first history post, shall we? And that was on July 18th. We had a fairly recent one in 2018. The Raptors made a huge off-season trade. They brought in Kawhi Leonard. They sent DeMar DeRozan and Jakob Poeltl.
Or some people say I'm calling Pirtle, which is a kind of an odd pronunciation, but I've heard it both ways, Poeltl and Pirtle.
And a first-round draft pick along with those two players to the Spurs. That was the biggest piece that helped to bring a championship to Canada. It was the first NBA championship for Canada. And Kawhi was, of course, the biggest and most important piece, but their championship run, they added a number of other pieces like Marc Gasol. And it was, pretty exciting finals. I actually remember that year. It was, one, I really don't like the Golden State Warriors, so I was rooting hard for Toronto. But that was a pretty great NBA year.
It was, and it was a fun playoff run, particularly for Toronto. They had that huge game-winning shot from the corner by Kawhi in order to beat the 76ers. And I think a lot of people sort of was it the Mandela syndrome, when you think of something that's not true, but you think it's true?
Right.
And I think everyone thinks that was the Eastern Conference Finals, but it wasn't. It was the semifinal. They still had to get through Giannis and the Bucks in order to get through that playoff. But Kawhi Leonard was a huge, huge part of what they were able to do in Toronto. And it had all the earmarkings of maybe something that wouldn't work out, or that it was a huge gamble, because he was on the last year of his deal and he had made it pretty clear that he wasn't going to re-sign in Toronto no matter what happened that season. He was going to go to either the Clippers or the Lakers, which he ended up going to the Clippers. But it all panned out and it all worked out and they got their championship.
Yeah, Fred VanVleet noted that everyone knew he was there on a one-year deal, and the players were comfortable with that. They looked at it as just their best shot to get a championship. And I think there was some criticism because, DeMar DeRozan was a pretty good player, and they had some control. He had 2 years of control plus a third-year player option, and so everyone was saying, you're trading for Kawhi, who had a rough relationship with Pop, and I think the narrative is, if you can't get along with Pop, or how much of a team player are you going to really be? But I think what Kawhi brought into that team was really that apex predator type player that Toronto was really missing. I mean, Lowry was a great player, and DeRozan's a great player, but they weren't really that guy who could really take over a game. And Kawhi, even as a Clippers fan, this comes up sometimes where he'll be a little inconsistent, but he'll have those monster games. And that's really what Toronto was looking for, someone who could really step it up in the playoffs and has those monster games. Because, if you recall, they were, swept 2 years prior. In both of the 2 years prior, they were swept by Cleveland, so they had a really hard time with matchups, especially against someone like LeBron.
Yeah, they had lost 3 straight years in the playoffs to Cleveland, and they got a little bit of a break. They had trouble matching up with LeBron. That was the year that LeBron decided to go to the Lakers, and so he was going to be out of the East. But they were able to get by the Magic in the first round, and that tough, gritty, really great 7-game series against the 76ers. With that monster shot from Kawhi at the end. And then they were able to make a comeback against the Bucks. Don't forget that they lost the first 2 games to Giannis and the Bucks. And it was Kawhi that told Nick Nurse, he said, I want to guard Giannis starting in game 3. And he did. And they were able to really neutralize Giannis and the Bucks to get to their first NBA Finals.
Yeah, and the thing that really allowed Toronto to do with bringing Kawhi is Lowry and really Pascal Siakam were really allowed to flourish as players. Kawhi being such a dominant force on the court really drew a lot more defenders that Toronto hadn't really seen that with any of their other players, and that really freed up some of those other guys around Kawhi who were good but not great, but they were allowed to play their game. And Siakam got actually most improved player that year.
He did, and it was the 3rd year for him in the league. And here's a guy that went from about 20 minutes a game up to 32, and from 7 points per game up to 23. And that just continued in the playoffs. And he was, really sort of who they ended up building around once Kawhi was gone. And that, I guess it all started with Kawhi, and it all started with this trade. But don't sleep on how important Marc Gasol was late in the year, that gave him that tough guy that had been through all of the wars before down in the post. And they went 17-9 after they got him around the trade deadline.
Yeah, and he was big for them. They gave him a lot of size, especially in the playoffs. And that was really what they were gearing up towards, because they were known as a really good regular season team. But in the playoffs, they really struggled with sort of matchups and having a lot of role players and someone who really couldn't or take control of the game, and they really got, whether it was outclassed on the boards or shooting wise or falling prone to traps. They did a lot of things well, but not exceptionally well, and so a lot of those players really fell into those roles, like Marc Gasol and, as I mentioned, Lowry and Siakam.
They did. They were actually plus 1850, Jeff, at the beginning of the season to win the championship. And their over-under win total was 55.5, which they eclipsed with 58 wins. But part of what really made all of this work was the decision to go ahead and fire Dwayne Casey and bring in Nick Nurse as his first year at the helm as the head coach. And I really feel like his energy and his work ethic of it being his first year and his first job and wanting to make it through was a little bit of what they needed, because although Dwayne Casey was very successful and he won 320 games when he was there, there wasn't necessarily the sense of urgency that they had under Nick Nurse, and maybe that sort of attention to detail that I think Dwayne Casey had reached the point where things had gotten a little bit stale, and they needed that influx, not just of players, but that influx of energy in the coaching room.
Yeah, and I think there was an initial criticism, as I recall, with DeRozan, who is known as really the soul of the team, and really bringing in Kawhi, who was much more distant player. He was sort of stoic, and a lot of the question circulators, like, how's he going to really clash in the how's he going to mesh with the existing players there in the locker room. And Nick Nurse was brought in for his offensive prowess and putting together schemes and plays on the court, and he mentioned that it was a culture reset, which sort of struck a lot of people as odd, because you're trading away the guy who really was the core of the culture in DeRozan. But it was this understanding that all the players bought into, this is who Kawhi is, this is the type of game we're going to play now. And I think it was Lowry who noted, in terms of Kawhi really demanding to have the ball more. He wanted to be the guy, as you mentioned, in a couple of those games. He really made that known. And Lowry just accepted and said, big dogs got to eat. And that was a famous line that he had. So it was a culture reset, not from trying to create this authentic clubhouse culture, because really, if you have a player for 1 year, how much can you really do around that? But it was a culture reset, and let's keep our eye on the prize. We have enough to win the whole thing. Let's get that done this year.
Yeah, and when you're looking at having somebody like Siakam, who is still trying to find his way and doesn't necessarily have the right to have an opinion about the way the club is being run, that really works. And Danny Green also came over, and he's an adult, and Gasol is an adult. And they brought Jeremy Lin in at the end of that season. Now, he didn't have much to do when they got into the playoffs and the finals. I think he played 51 seconds in the finals, but he was good down the stretch that got them their seeding. And like I said, he's an adult. And so all of those players were able to sort of compartmentalize and we'll worry about 2019, 2020 when it gets here. But for now, it's row the boat. And it was really kind of a masterful job of how to run your organization under a really, really small window. And that's what they had, was a super small window. And for me, it wasn't necessarily did Toronto do the right thing by getting rid of DeMar DeRozan. It was, did San Antonio do the wrong thing by bringing in DeMar DeRozan? And not that DeMar DeRozan isn't a good player, not that you can't win with him, but the Spurs were in a position where they shouldn't be trying to hang on and make the playoffs and maybe make it to round two. They were at a point that they didn't need to bring players like DeRozan in. They needed to send out guys like LaMarcus Aldridge and kind of burn it all down and start over again. And bringing in DeRozan, I think they really delayed the rebuilding process for San Antonio that it's taken them until this year to recoup from.
Yeah, do you think that's the result of, they have to explain it to the fan base. You're trading a player like Kawhi, and what are you getting back? And we saw, kind of in Dallas recently, right? You got to get something back, or the fans are just not going to be happy. And it's hard sometimes to convince fans of these long-term strategies by the front office and moving into rebuilding year. But that was a point in time when fans in San Antonio weren't used to rebuilding years. They were used to being competitive all the time.
Yeah, they were, and it is a tough sell, and it ultimately worked out for them because it's easy to say, "Hey, look, we got Wemby, woohoo!" Right? Like, it worked out. And to their credit, they did get Keldon Johnson with the draft pick that came over in that trade. So they were able to jumpstart their rebuilding program. But it is tough to make those decisions. Although I would much rather have that conversation with San Antonio fans about not bringing in a guy and jettisoning somebody maybe like LaMarcus Aldridge. I'd rather have that conversation in San Antonio than try to explain to Dallas the whole Luka debacle.
Right.
Yeah, particularly because it turns out that it was less basketball, more personal. And that's even harder to explain.
Yeah, and I think a lot of it, too, was Pop's relationship with Kawhi. He probably was at his wit's end with him, and Kawhi wasn't happy there, and so there was a lot of bad blood between the two. Although if you ask them both now, they sort of have a little bit of a nicer spin on the whole thing. And maybe Kawhi looks back and realizes he probably could have been a little more mature. And Pop, I'm sure, has a lot of professional courtesy and doesn't want to sort of smear someone's reputation. And maybe in the end, teams sometimes don't make great decisions. A lot of it had to do with Kawhi's rehabbing and how they treated his injuries. We all know Kawhi has a lot of injury history. So there's a lot there, but I think in the end it seems like eventually San Antonio did get their reset, and now they're in a pretty good position.
And you look a whole lot smarter in Toronto when Kevin Durant is hurt for the first 4 games of the finals and then comes back in game 5 and hurts himself. And Klay Thompson tears his ACL, game 6. So you look a whole lot smarter because you win that series. But when you dive into why you won the series, there's a fair amount of good fortune on the Toronto side and a little bit of bad luck or a lot of bad luck on the Golden State side.
Yeah, and if you remember, LeBron was no longer in the East, right?
Correct.
Also, that was the first year that he's gone. So who knows what it would be like if they had to go up against LeBron yet again. But he was now with the Lakers, and they didn't have to worry about that.
Yeah, and they avoided, the Celtics. They didn't have to play them in the playoffs. Right. They went through the Magic, the Sixers, and the Bucks, which, if you're going to draw a path through the East, that's a pretty good path. And as you saw, they had the most amount of trouble with the 76ers because Embiid was healthy for that whole series. So,
yeah, well, it's great for them. I'm glad the Raptors have remained relevant. They seem to be on and off in the discussion constantly. Nice to keep Canada in the conversation for just the health of the NBA. So, happy for Toronto fans to get that championship a few years ago. Well, let's move on. We have another this will be a good transition because it's both a basketball and a baseball discussion that we're going to get into in a little bit. But a two-sport athlete that's often overlooked and left out of the discussion is Dave DeBusschere.
Dave DeBusschere. The Bush.
And maybe that's because he only played MLB for parts of 2 seasons, right? He appeared as a pitcher in 36 games, and he was fairly pedestrian as a pitcher, but anyone who makes it to that level is a good player. But on July 17th in 1963, he got his only MLB hit. After the 63 season, he did go back to the NBA, and he stayed there with just basketball following that season. Eventually had a Hall of Fame career. He won 2 championships with the Knicks. He made it to 8 All-Star teams. He's regarded as one of the top 50 all-time greatest NBA players. Sounds like you're a fan of Dave DeBusschere.
Oh yeah, he's Mr. New York City. Come on now. He's as famous there as Walt Clyde Frazier and I guess Jalen Brunson now or Willis Reed. Patrick Ewing. Yeah, no, Dave DeBusschere's a huge fan favorite. If you go to Madison Square Garden on any given night, you'll see a DeBusschere jersey on somebody.
I was looking up sort of MLB and NBA players. There's only been 13 to ever play in both MLB and NBA. And it's probably at the top of the list. You have Danny Ainge, Gene Conley, and Dick Groat.
Yes,
I didn't know that about Dick Groat, but yeah.
Hall of Famer Dick Groat from the Pirates, correct? He played for the Pirates. Yeah.
He won an MVP, but he was also an NBA guard. But Dave DeBusschere, he had actually probably outside of his pro career, his college career, he probably has the best complete two-sport college career as far as baseball and basketball goes, right?
Yeah, probably. I would venture to say because Jackie Robinson only played 1 year at UCLA and he didn't play a lot. He was on the team, but he didn't play a ton. But Jackie Robinson clearly, he didn't actually. Honestly, Jackie Robinson didn't even have a great baseball college career either. He really had a good football career and track career. But yeah, certainly in college, he was legit, and he could have gone to any number of big-time programs, DeBusschere, but he wanted to stay close to home. He was from the east side of Detroit, and he ended up at the University of Detroit, which now we know as Detroit Mercy. But he could have probably gone to Kentucky or, Duke, Louisville, Michigan, one of those schools.
Yeah, in college, he was a three-time consensus All-American. He had averaged almost 25 points a game in his college career, almost 20 rebounds in his game. He actually still holds the school record for 39 rebounds against Central Michigan that came in January of 1960. He also has 540 rebounds on this season, also a school record. And in baseball, he had a career 2.20 ERA, was drafted by the White Sox. So I think a lot of people think of Danny Ainge as having a stellar career, but I think most of his accolades come in that senior year. But DeBusschere had a pretty complete college career for his entire tenure at Detroit.
Yeah, and you think about a guy that, like Dave DeBusschere, clearly a better basketball player. Ainge, clearly a better basketball player. Dick Groat, clearly a better baseball player. But a guy that gets left out who might have been kind of the best at both was Mark Hendrickson. Because he played 10 years in Major League Baseball, and he played, 8 years, 6, 8 years in the NBA. He was like a 13-minute a night guy. Only 3 points per game, but he pitched 10 years, even though he had a losing record, 58-74, but still he had played 10 years. So if you kind of say, well, who had the most successful career in basketball and baseball combined, at least in terms of longevity, don't forget about Mark Hendrickson. But DeBusschere clearly made the right choice to go be a basketball player. And when he went to play for the Pistons, because he didn't initially go to the Knicks, he went to play for the hometown Pistons, they offered him the player coach position. So he was the head coach so that he would quit baseball.
Yeah, he is actually player coach at 24, is the youngest in NBA history. And that was really at a time when sort of the player coach, even by the 60s, was kind of falling out of fashion. There were a few left, but that was sort of the previous era of Bill Russell, Dolph Schayes, Bob Cousy, who were all sort of famous player coaches. But that just sort of gets to his leadership. And he was really known probably for his leadership as much for his skills on the court, if not more. I mean, he was definitely someone who had leadership in a variety of different areas. He was a player coach, and then he was considered really the emotional and defensive anchor on that championship Knicks team. He won 2 titles with them. And then later on, he moved to sort of that executive level, and he was the last commissioner of the ABA, and he really helped usher in the merging of the ABA and the NBA.
Yeah, he did. And when he went to the Knicks, Phil Jackson had said he was the missing piece. And the way that he really sort of hooked up with Bill Bradley, that, DeBusschere was sort of the defensive anchor, and then, Bill Bradley played a lot of the offense on the wing. Not that DeBusschere couldn't hit, deep jumpers, but, it was certainly like a Bill Bradley, Willis Reed for the offense. But Phil Jackson said that he had a Velcro chest, and once he bodied you up, you weren't getting by. And we all remember the Willis Reed game, right? Game 7 of the NBA Finals in, was that 1970? 1970? Game 5, when Willis Reed got hurt, it was Dave DeBusschere that guarded Wilt Chamberlain. It wasn't Clyde Walt Frazier. It was Dave DeBusschere.
Yeah, I think one thing that really speaks to his sort of leadership and really forward-thinking, someone who was ahead of his time, he kept a diary, and he references it in a book that he wrote later called The Open Man, the Championship Diary of the New York Knicks. And he really kept a diary of all sort of the goings-on in the locker room and the team culture and sort of what happened behind the scenes. And he really didn't have a look into the players and team culture. I mean, now it's such a regular thing with social media, and everyone wants to be on camera and everyone has something to say. But in the 60s, that was not something that really happened. And that was something he just kind of kept himself, and later revealed that he had been keeping this diary. But it was such an interesting look into, from what I've read in the excerpts from that book, there was just a really interesting insight into sort of his mindset and how he looked at sort of a team and team chemistry. And one thing that I really appreciated about DeBusschere is, as a leader, I think everyone thinks leaders have to be these screaming, fiery personalities to really motivate a team, but he was the opposite. He was quiet. He led by example. He did it, and then it, had the expectation that you followed along. And he was really sort of the model for that kind of quiet leadership.
Yeah, he had told the team in the huddle when Willis Reed got hurt. He said, "We've got him. We got you. No problem. We'll go win Game 5." And then it was Dave DeBusschere who went to Willis Reed before Game 7 and said, "Even if you don't play tonight, what it will mean to this building and to us to come out to shoot around, that might be all we need you for." And he did, and he had always said later in life, like, if you looked over at the Lakers, once they saw Willis Reed in the layup line, it was like they had already won the game. The Knicks knew that they had won. The Lakers had given up once they saw him in the layup line, and that goes to his leadership, that he had said, even if you don't play, just come get the crowd fired up.
That's right.
And they did.
Well, Walt Frazier said about him, he was a blue-collar player who led by example with tenacity on the court. So I think that speaks to sort of how he could flip the switch, right, when he was on the court. And he could be that aggressive, defensive stalwart, really to take on whoever he needed to on the court. But off the court, he knew what role he had to play. And to me, that's really the true sign of sort of a great leader and someone of that mindset who knows the right ingredient that's needed at the right time. When you need to be tenacious, you're tenacious. When you need to be cool-headed and calm and collected, you're cool-headed, calm, and collected. And then everything in between.
Yeah, and I wonder how much of that he took to the NBA locker room from the Major League Baseball locker room, particularly seeing, the culture that exists over 162 games plus spring training, and the culture that existed between the pitching staff and the field players, and then he spent all that time in the bullpen because he was sort of a spot starter, so he spent a lot of time in the bullpen, and that's a whole different animal and culture. I wonder how much of that he took. All I do know about his baseball career, though, is if you could get just about any general manager to sign up and have a relief pitcher these days come in and have a 2.90 ERA, they would take Dave DeBusschere, because 2.90 now, especially in a bullpen, I'll take that all day.
Yeah, I always thought about baseball players. There's a lot of value in going through the minor league system, which he did for a short time. You see in other sports that there's oftentimes some maturing that needs to happen, and I think baseball players get a lot of that out of their system in the minors and kind of putting in their time, and it's not fancy. There's no frills in the minors oftentimes, and it's just all about playing and proving yourself. I think there's a lot of intangible value to something like that.
Yeah, especially then. I mean, it's gotten significantly better now, but even 10 years ago, 5 years ago, it was still rough going in the minors.
Yeah. Okay, well, let's move on to a little more baseball. It was the Home Run Derby, as I think you are aware, earlier this week. And so we had a Home Run Derby post. We posted about Prince Fielder, who on July 13th, 2009, he won the Home Run Derby. He beat Nelson Cruz of the Texas Rangers. It was Prince's first Home Run Derby win. He'd repeat again as a Tiger in 2012. Well, I want to talk a little bit about Prince Fielder, but just really quick, does winning the Home Run Derby really mean all that much?
Well, it did this year because the winner got $1 million.
That's true.
So that means that, not that I got to saw it because Rob Manfred decided that he didn't want me to watch the Home Run Derby because he put it on Netflix. So it was not available to me. So I was not able to watch it because it was not broadcast for me because he doesn't want me to see it. Like he doesn't want me to see 20% of the league because he blacks it out. So I did not get to see it. Nor does the Home Run Derby mean a tremendous amount to me. I think of all of the skills competitions, I would rather watch the three-point shootout. That's about the only one that I like. I do like in the hockey one, I guess, when they shoot the targets in the goal. I think that one's kind of interesting. Most of the other ones on All-Star weekends don't really get me all that excited, Home Run Derby included.
In Japan, they do like a bunt competition. You have to bunt it. I think I would like to watch that, actually. I think that would be pretty fun. I think the interesting thing about the Home Run Derby is actually you and I went a few years ago, and we sat in probably the worst seats that people would normally consider. But actually, for the Home Run Derby, the nosebleeds were the best seats because you could see all the balls flying out of the stadium. But let's just want to talk a little bit about Prince Fielder and really sad sort of ending to his career. He's just all around just such a fantastic player. Seemed to be all he cared about was going in and playing every game. In fact, he played 4 seasons of 162 games, which is pretty remarkable, even during his time, and just something you don't even see back then. But do you feel that he had a Hall of Fame trajectory career?
I 100% feel that he really got robbed with his injury. Of not being able to continue, because if you look at where he was and the skill set that he had, yeah, he was a big guy and he was a bopper, but he was fast, he was athletic, he was a good defender, he had great hands, and he hit a lot of home runs, Jeff. He hit he hit over 300 and something home runs. Just for 319, he was a 283 hitter, had over 1,000 RBIs. And he lost at least 5 years, maybe more, off the tail end of his career. And I think if he continues to play, even at a diminished return, which he probably would have from ages 33 to 38 and beyond, he hits all of the markers that you need to be a Hall of Fame player.
Yeah, he, it's really remarkable. Something that I think gets lost in his injury is, so he had, prior to his injury, which was 2014, and he had a neck injury, right? It was he had a herniated disc in his neck, and he had to have surgery to sort of fuse those discs. But he had 3 seasons of more than 100 RBIs, and actually, prior to those 3 seasons, he had one where he had 83, but then right before that, he hit triple digits in RBIs. So he was putting up a lot of RBIs, a lot of home runs. And the really interesting thing about him is this, with all that power, his walk to strikeout ratio was almost 1-to-1. And that was in an era where strikeouts were becoming more and more common. So the fact that, he averaged 90 walks during his sort of peak years, which was 2006, which was his rookie year, to 2013. So he averaged 90 walks and 120 strikeouts. It's not one for one, but it's pretty close. And at the same time, he was averaging 35 home runs a year, 107 RBIs. So I found that pretty remarkable, and really sad to see him drop off. But one other thing that I think does get lost, as I was starting to mention, was that when he returned in 2015, still having issues with his neck, but he was well enough to play, he hit 305 batting average, and he played 158 games. That's crazy.
It is. And if you look at his 162 game average, Jeff, so his 162 game average was 32 home runs, 103 RBI. And then you say, conservatively, if you just say, all right, for the rest of his career, he's going to be 75% of the player that he was. Now, I think he's probably going to be better than that, particularly in the first couple years beyond what age 32 was when he had to retire. But just at 75%, right, and just for 5 years. Now, he probably played with the designated hitter. He probably would have been like Miguel Cabrera or Victor Martinez and played to like 42. He probably might have had another 10 years. But just at 5 and at 75%, even though he could have been 80 or 85, right? That puts him at 24 home runs and 77 RBIs a year, right, for the next 5 years. That means he's got another 120 home runs and another 385 RBIs, which means at the end, at just retiring at 37, he would have 439 home runs and he would have 1,413 RBIs. Automatic Hall of Fame. Automatic. He would have more home runs than Andre Dawson. He would have more home runs than Carlos Beltran, than Andrew Jones, than Cal Ripken Jr., than Mike Piazza, than Billy Williams, than Duke Snyder, than Johnny Bench or Harold Baines. He's going to have more RBIs than Andre Dawson. He's going to have more RBIs than Todd Helton and Yogi Berra and Robin Yount and Mike Piazza and Larry Walker and Andrew Jones and Edgar Martinez. It's going to be in the Hall. Going to be in the Hall. And that's it, 75% for 5 years.
I think one thing that probably, if you are going to sort of look at the argument where maybe he doesn't make it to the Hall, is first base was a position where they were putting up a lot of big numbers. And he was playing in the shadow of Albert Pujols, who was just, one of the greatest starts to anybody's career in history of baseball. And Ryan Howard was in that during that period as well, who was just remarkable during probably around the same time period. So I think the only thing that I think voters might look at is like, well, how does he stack up against some of his contemporaries? And I do think that it's changed a little bit, but at least during that time that he played, the expectation was that first basemen were just these big power hitters. So, I agree with you. I think he is in the Hall, but I do think that there's, if there is a question, it's the position he played and the contemporaries he played against.
But he certainly would have gotten beyond would he get 3 votes? 2%? Yeah, for sure. Dropped off after the first year. You're at least going to be having a conversation about Prince Fielder for, if not he's in the Hall, you're going to have the conversation for the entire 10 years he's on the ballot, even if it's the 8th year that he gets in. But, yeah, I absolutely thought he was. For God's sakes, Jeff, they traded Lyle Overbay to Toronto to give him a spot, for God's sakes. Lyle Overbay.
Well, I think he's kind of a tragic figure for me in baseball because, one, he was so passionate about baseball. All he cared about was playing. And to have just this horrible injury where the doctors basically told him in the end, you have to quit baseball. You can't play anymore. And just as he was still in his prime. And then also earlier in his life having, Cecil Fielder, his father, and he had such a difficult relationship with his father. And he always had to sort of escape that past. And I know that was something probably very difficult for him. So he was, to me, it's such a tragic baseball figure because he gets forgotten about because his career was shortened so much, but he was such a fantastic player and such a likable player.
Yeah, and unfortunately, he had some struggles when he did make it to the postseason, particularly the World Series. He had a real donkey of a World Series when the Tigers lost to the Giants. He went one of 14, I think, in that World Series. He was like a 180 something hitter for his entire playoff career, and that was really the sad end to not having a championship, particularly 2013. Remember, 2013 was when they lost to the Red Sox. Remember Torrey Hunter jumping over the wall, and that was probably his best team that he was ever on, because Victor Martinez was in that lineup, and Miguel Cabrera was in that lineup, and Torrey Hunter was in that lineup. So that was probably his best shot, and they bowed out in the American League Championship Series.
Yeah, I was actually surprised that he never placed higher than, well, not that third is so terrible in MVP voting. He got third twice, but it felt like he probably should have gotten a little more MVP nod than he did. And again, I think he's going up against Pujols, who is sort of a perennial MVP contender, and some other players, but feels like just with the numbers he put up early on, especially having 50 home runs and 119 RBI in 2007, that's something that you feel like, wow, surprised he didn't win an MVP.
Mm-hmm.
So, okay. All right, well, let's move on. We have another, we talked about the home run derby. We also had an all-star game post as well. Sticking with our theme of perennial all-stars and legendary players, this one's about Mike Trout. And at the 2015 All-Star Game, which happened on July 14th that year, Mike Trout repeated as All-Star MVP. He had a solid showing, as solid as you can get for an All-Star game. He went 1 for 3 with a leadoff home run. And he joined an exclusive club of Willie Mays, Steve Garvey, Gary Carter, and Cal Ripken Jr. as the only players to win the All-Star MVP twice. Clayton, what are your thoughts on Mike Trout?
Well, my thought first is congratulations and thank you to you, Jeff, as an avid Dodger fan, that you would allow a Mike Trout post in which he hits a home run off of Dodger Zach Greinke, and Hall of Fame Dodger pitcher Clayton Kershaw takes the loss in this, so that we can celebrate Angel Mike Trout. So big kudos to you for not holding your fandom in front of history.
Well, if you notice on the summary of my update, although that made it into the history post on our social media, I did leave that out of our update here. But hat tip to Mike Trout. He's a great player. So, I'm okay.
And to your credit, Greinke pitched 2 innings. He did strike out Pujols, Nelson Cruz, Adam Jones, and Salvador Perez. So he did make a comeback, even though he had that home run given up to Trout. Interesting fact about this game, Jeff, is that Mike Trout actually scored 2 runs because he got on base on a fielder's choice, and then he was driven in by Prince Fielder of the Texas Rangers in this game. But what Mike Trout, for me, he also too is a little bit of a tragic figure in that he had such a great and early dominating career, and he's been rather ordinary the past 5 or 6 years. But I don't think that in any way will preclude him from being a Hall of Fame player. But he does have to answer the questions, or voters have to answer the questions of how do you rectify the past 5 years of his career. Now, granted, he's having a pretty solid season this year, but you're talking about a guy that's never been above 3 in WAR for the past since 2019.
Yeah, but I think his peak is not just good; it's exceptional.
Mm-hmm. It's elite. It's
yeah.
But so is Dale Murphy's. But it's longer and better than Dale Murphy's. I'm just saying that to act like Mike Trout has been the same player that he was the first 5-6 years of his career for his whole career is not an accurate evaluation of the numbers that he's put up in the games that he's played.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. I think he's, in terms of his Hall of Fame creds, I don't know if anyone's really doubting that he won't make it
Mm-hmm.
into the Hall. I think it's more of like, when would he get in, right? Is he going to be a first ballot Hall of Famer, or is he going to have to wait? Interesting thing here that he could reasonably get to, he's what, 34 right now, which I was actually had to double check that number because he feels like he's been around for so long, but he's still only 34. He's right now sitting at a little over 1,800 hits, so he could reasonably get to 2,000 hits easily before the end of his career. He's sitting at 422 home runs. That's including what he's done this year. Could pretty reasonably get to 500 home runs. And he already has over 200 stolen bases. He would join a club of Willie Mays, Hank Aaron, Frank Robinson, Reggie Jackson, and Barry Bonds as the only individuals to post those numbers. All are in the Hall of Fame except for Bonds, but he really should be in the Hall of Fame, my opinion. Don't at me. Just think Barry Bonds should be in the Hall of Fame. And it's crazy because I think people forget how much speed he had. He led MLB in 49 stolen bases, also with 30 home runs in his rookie year. Those stolen bases kind of tapered off. It seems like he traded that out for a little more power. But that's something that he really had going for him, a true five-tool player.
He was a true five-tool player, but he's also, I think, suffers a little bit nationally from just how invisible the Angels are in terms of a national audience. That, anybody in the Central or the East probably isn't staying up late to watch Angel games on the package. The Angels are blacked out from a tremendous amount of the West because for some reason, like Las Vegas is a local market to Anaheim, so we can't watch them. They're not typically on a lot of nationally televised games, and they haven't made the playoffs. He's only been to the playoffs once. He lost all 3 games to the Royals. So there's not been a lot of times to see him for a lot of people, with the exception of, the All-Star games and highlight reels, and a number of people in Japan that got to see him just because they were getting every Ohtani game when he was an Angel. But the Angels have done a poor job of putting together a competitive roster since 2002, that a lot of his accomplishments, and particularly his best years, were rather invisible to a large number of people.
Yeah, I also feel that he suffers a little bit because I just don't think he has that much of a personality. I mean, he's a great player on the field, right? And he's got a lot of those signature highlight reels, like the, pounding his chest when he took the ball away from the wall, the home run ball away at the wall. But he's always kind of been the good soldier, where he hasn't really pressed the Angels to be more competitive that you'll see with a lot of superstar players who want to win. You just haven't felt like that's really been a priority for him, or at least it hasn't come through in the national media narratives. I also just think a lot of superstars are way more marketable, and maybe some of that relates to what you're saying about the Angels, that they haven't really been in the postseason, so you don't get a lot of national recognition. But there's a lot of players on a lot of teams who aren't in massive media markets who seem to just get marketed a little better. And to me, he's always been a little bit of if you like baseball and you're really into the X's and O's of baseball and all the intricacies of the play, you love Mike Trout and you're a huge fan. If you're a casual fan, he's not someone that you're really attaching yourself to because he doesn't come through that way in TV coverage.
Yeah, he doesn't do a lot of media, and he doesn't do social media, and you don't see him on particularly a lot of commercials. And the ones that you do see, you don't see a lot of personality. But so much of that has to do with, like I said, they just haven't been in the playoffs, and when they were, they got swept. Even though the Angels will say they've tried, they brought in Albert Pujols while he was there, Josh Hamilton, Raul Ibanez, Shohei Ohtani, David Freese, Torrey Hunter, Tyler Anderson, Jorge Soler, Yusei Kikuchi. Like, they've tried to bring guys in. None of it has worked out. But yeah, it's a little unfortunate that his greatness and the best years, which are all behind him, were not seen.
Yeah, I mean, I think the common statement attached to him is, oh, if only we could see Mike Trout in the playoffs, and that's the one thing that true baseball fans are always longing for. That's one of those ever-present statements that maybe is this the year that he'll get into the playoffs. And some of that is roster construction. I mean, the Angels have had some bad luck with some unfortunate injuries or promising young players who, sadly passed away. But I think some of it is just poor roster construction. It seems like the Angels year in, year out kind of throw a collection of names together and pay them a lot of money and then expect them all to fit together. And they don't put a lot of thought into sort of how the pieces fit together, how to build a clubhouse culture that really leads to winning. And again, I think it goes back to my comment, and not to be too harsh on Mike Trout, but sometimes the superstars have to sort of make it known in the clubhouse and in the front office on what they want the direction of the team to be. And I've just never gotten the sense that Mike Trout has really put himself in the position to do that.
Yeah, I don't think he's the guy that's going to walk in and turn over the after-game spread and kind of yell at the team. That, he sort of feels like his responsibility is his responsibility and the other player's responsibility is theirs, and he's going to do his part, and he hopes that everyone else does theirs. I would be curious if the Phillies were able to put together a deal to bring him there during their little championship window here. And that's always been the rumor, because he's a South Jersey guy, that if there was one place that he was going to approve a deal to, because he's certainly got 5 and 10 rights and can block anything, it would be to go back to Philly. But to see maybe a dynamic roster there with him and Harper and Trey Turner and Real Muto and Schwarber, like that mashing lineup together, if that could be a place where he thrives and where Philadelphia embraces him in a way that we see more of the marketable Mike Trout.
Yeah, I would love that. I mean, I do want him to be successful. I want to see him in the playoffs. I do wish he can get that opportunity. I like him as a player, marketing aside. One thing that I think is challenging for any team to try to make a play for him is that the way Angels ownership values Mike Trout. They value the name and the presence that he brings to the season ticket holders on the field. There was the article that got a lot of play recently where Artie Moreno said, well, I don't know why the fans are so upset. I give them Mike Trout and I put him on the field. Shouldn't they be happy about that? As if fans don't care about winning in Anaheim, I guess. But are you going to get comparable value back, or is the Angels going to demand a lot more than what he really will bring back to Philly or any team in a trade?
Yeah, that's the $1 million question is, will the Angels front office ever get it right?
Right. All right, well, let's move on. We have a golf post, but it also has an MLB tie, so it's a great segue to that. And so, summer, my favorite season. It's a great time for baseball and golf. And we got done talking about the All-Star Game. There's a connection between baseball and golf on July 15th, 1945, when legendary golfer Byron Nelson won his second PGA championship. It was the fifth and final major of his career. And the person he beat was Sam Bird, and Sam Bird had a marginal 8-year career with MLB. From 1929 to 1936, he was an outfielder with the Yankees and the Reds, and left his baseball career behind and became a professional golfer. Byron Nelson, how influential is he in the sport of golf to you?
He is one of the most important figures in terms of the PGA and the development of golf as we know it. And I always think about for as much as he is celebrated, that he's maybe not celebrated enough, even though he's going to make every top 10 list that there is in the history of the PGA. He came along at the exact right time because he was a real bridge from the old golf to what became the new golf. And I mean that in multiple ways. One was in terms of star power, because the 20s, 30s, you're talking, that's still Bobby Jones and Gene Sarazen and Walter Hagen, that group. And Arnold Palmer and Jack Nicklaus had not yet come along. And so there was this little gap in between where you had Byron Nelson and Sam Snead and Ben Hogan. And Sam Snead and Ben Hogan were really kind of the second half of that gap, where Byron Nelson was the front half of that gap.
Yeah, and coming out of the Depression and then World War II, you had a lot of well-known golfers or solid talent that went off and served in World War II. So, Byron Nelson really kind of sort of gave it a personality and someone that everyone could talk about. The thing that's really interesting about all of this is that they were now moving into the sort of the TV era, right, where we talk about Arnold Palmer and Jack Nicklaus, but prior to this era, it was really still kind of a country club vibe and sort of a little more of a close knit. So this was a time post World War II where people are starting to look at sports more. They're starting to want to get away from sort of the era of war, and media is looking for something else to cover. And his 1945 season, which is regarded as one of the best golf seasons of all time, if not sort of the consensus best year in golf for any player in all time, that came at just the right time, right?
Yeah, it did, because he won the PGA Championship, which was the only major that was played that year because of World War II, and it was done in a different fashion. We think about stroke play the way it is now, but back then it was match play. So you kind of really attached yourself to a guy. I think there's only really one match play championship these days on the tour, but all the majors used to be that way. So you'd follow a guy in the newspaper 3, 4, 5 days as it went along. And that season, and really the career that he had when he had winning 18 of 30 events, coming second 7 times in that season, and then to win 11 in a row. He ended up retiring with 52 tour wins, and he just was the guy for that small period of time. And he was also a huge innovator. He's always been described as the father of the modern golf swing. And why that is because as he came onto the PGA Tour, that is when they went from really wooden shafts to steel shafts. And it really changed how your golf swing had to be. And so he really incorporated using his legs and using his feet to create power in order to hit well with these new steel shafts. That was something that Gene Sarazen had struggled with. And Gene Sarazen had said when he first saw Byron Nelson play, he said, that kid's not going to be around. He'll never make it with that swing, until he himself tried to hit steel shafts. And then he was like, I can't hit them. Right? What is Byron Nelson doing? Because he hits them great. And then, that swing developed a lot because of Byron Nelson coming along with not too much experience with the old equipment to be able to adapt to the new equipment.
Yeah, and then matching with his game, he had the personality, right? He had the soft, sort of dignified gentleman that I really think is synonymous with golf. I mean, growing up, that's what my image of golfers was always this very sort of low-key personality. Not, if you see a golfer who's flamboyant and really out there, it's really unusual because so many of the greats really modeled themselves after Byron Nelson. Arnold Palmer said he idolized Byron Nelson, and that was the personality he really wanted to emulate. And I think, we talked about Dave DeBusschere, sort of having that leadership and that personality that was sort of equal to his game on the court. I think Byron Nelson was probably similar in that respect because he also had that personality that was as much a part of his game as swinging the club and all his golf IQ.
And he was perfect to be a newspaper star, more so than a television star. And I think the media might get frustrated with that he wasn't flamboyant or he wasn't television friendly necessarily, but he was always good. For a quote, when he was asked why he plays so aggressive, he said, "Because God hates a coward." So that's why he always played aggressive. But one of the things that's amazing about, we think about the wins, right? The 52 tour wins and the 11 in a row and 18 out of 30. But he had a string of 113 tournaments of making the cut that wasn't broken until Tiger Woods' 142. But if you truly know what that means, it's even more impressive. Because now making the cut simply means that you get a check, right? That's all it means. You get a check. In some tournaments, you get a check even if you don't make the cut. You get a check just for showing up. So even if you don't play Saturday and Sunday, you're still on the made the cut list because you got a check. When Byron Nelson was playing, only the top 20 guys got a check, even if they played on Saturday and Sunday. So he really had 113 straight top 20 finishes. That's what that means. Tiger Woods' 142 does not mean that he had 142 straight top 20 finishes.
Yeah, and in that 1945 season, just to add on to what you just noted, in those 30 PGA tournaments that he played, he was never out of the top 10. Mm-hmm. So he was, that year was just simply incredible. But, one thing that also he really helped grow the game as he retired, because he did retire at a very young age. I think it really shocked everyone. He was still in his early 30s. He said he wanted to just retire back to his ranch in Texas and live out the rest of his life. But he still stayed very involved in golf, and he really helped raise the visibility of the sport. And he remained on as a broadcaster through the 80s. And early on, I think TV really found it to be immensely powerful to have a voice and a mind like his, calling the game, talking about the game, analyzing the game, something they never really had, especially someone who was so close and relevant at that time. And so I think even after he left the sport, in terms of his playing time, he was still really contributing to the popularity.
And it's one thing to have, sort of an ex-baseball player talk about baseball. It's something that a lot of people are familiar with. But even golfers don't know as much about golf as they think that they know compared to somebody like Byron Nelson. It's really, on that niche side of being able to explain something that your audience has probably never considered. And he always told a funny story about when he first got married to his wife. And he said they didn't have any money. And they were living at a friend's house, and he said, I was having trouble driving, and so I told my wife, he's like, I'm gonna go get another driver. I've got 4, but none of them are working. I'm gonna go get a 5th driver. So he told his wife he's gonna get a 5th driver, and she looked at him and she said, well, that's fine, but I think you should know, since we got married, that I haven't bought any new dresses. And I haven't bought any new shoes, and I haven't bought any dishes. We don't have any furniture, and we're not living at our own place. But you feel like you need to get that 5th driver, even though you already have 4, and if you need to, go ahead and do that. But think for a second. If you've got 4 drivers and none of them are working, either you don't know what kind of driver you want, or you don't know how to drive. And he's thought, she's kind of right. Like, what am I going to get that I already have? So he ended up hooking up with this guy, this pro named Dutch Loeffler. And he went down to his shop and he was like, can I use your tools and just make my own driver out of what I've got? Because there's nothing here that's giving me what I need. Let me modify my own equipment. And once he did that, he started building his own driver, and the rest is history. So good on you to his wife. And I hope she got some dishes and shoes.
Sometimes advice comes from the most unexpected places.
That's
right?
True. Yep.
Okay, we're getting close to time here, but I want to talk about a couple other posts that we had, and we're going to connect these 2 posts. And I think it's going to be a surprising connection, but I think it'll make sense because One is about track and the other is about Formula One. So they're both about speed.
Mm-hmm.
So the first one in 1969 on July 19th, Sir Jackie Stewart, known as the Flying Scot, outclassed 17 other drivers, lapping the entire field en route to his Formula One victory at the British Grand Prix. It is the first of 3 Formula One World Championships. The other 2 came in 71 and 73. And then in 1988, on July 16th, Florence Griffith Joyner, also known as FloJo, dominated the 100 meter and set a wind legal mark of 10:49 in the quarterfinals of the U.S. Olympic trials, an astonishing mark even by men's standards. At the Seoul Olympics that year, she'd win gold in the 100 meter and also the 200 meter, the 4x100 relay, and she'd get a 4th medal in silver in the 4x400 relay. And the 100 meter, that record still stands to this day.
Mm-hmm.
So the Flying Scot and FloJo are the 2 of the greatest who dominated their respective sports, and they did it with speed. Obviously, speed from completely different sources, but they were alike in a couple of other ways where they were really at the forefront of sort of fashion and style that really intertwined into who they were as an athlete, right?
Absolutely. Those 2 are kind of the prototypes of how to market yourself, not just during your event, but before your event, after your event, and when you're out and about doing other things that are not your event. And Jackie Stewart was kind of accessible in an inaccessible time in terms of his look and his fashion. And, I think if you asked a lot of people in, the 60s and 70s, if they could point out a race car driver, they could point out Jackie Stewart. Mm-hmm. Like, he was different looking than all of the rest of the folks. And he sort of happenstanced upon it by accident, in that he was giving interviews and they were taking pictures of these magazines, and he always said he always looked bad after a race because, he'd just been going 170 miles an hour for 500 miles, and he just looked like crap, and his hair was matted down, and he looked awful. So he started wearing this tartan hunting cap to cover his messed up hair. And photographers really liked it, and people started to notice him, and he linked in with his Scottish heritage, and he started to accent everything in his tartan garb, and that sort of became his look, and that became his look and what was expected when he would go and do a speaking engagement or he would make an appearance. They would always say, "Oh, can you wear the hat? Can you, wear the, bring the scarf?" All of those things, and it just sort of became what his public identity was. And so he was one of the first people that was able, to sort of do that. He leaned into his Scottish heritage. He got deals with sunglasses. Like, he always wore these aviator sunglasses no matter where he was. That just became like his look. He's kind of like there's a whole lot of Austin Powers in Jackie Stewart.
Yeah, I had that same thought about Austin Powers. He had the long hair, and he said that, you go to these events off the racetrack, right? They're a little more elegant, and so you got to wear a suit and a blazer. But when he's in his racing mode, he knew that sort of style and image was really important to attracting sponsors, and it was really forward thinking, because now it seems like just such commonplace that athletes are all thinking about that. Mm-hmm. But back then, it was not. Athletes, especially drivers, weren't as aware of making these specific choices in image to really attract sponsors. And one thing that he had going for him was that look was also at the height of John Lennon, right? So it was this kind of John Lennon-esque sort of look with the aviator glasses and the hat and the overalls and sort of the long hair. And that was really different than a lot of drivers, right? He really stood out, and it helped him secure deals like Rolex, because it was there were drivers that really had that sort of flamboyant look, but his was not flamboyance. It was sort of mixed with elegance. And that really helped him, like I said, stand out, attract some of these sponsors, and really establish himself. I mean, it helped that he was a fantastic driver, but in addition to just creating this personality for himself.
And it also created sort of what Formula One was. And we've talked about their desire to go as sort of an event in an elegant space. But he also was really influential in terms of increasing all of the safety features, not just on the car, but for the crowd, because they used to do a lot of these Grand Prix races would be on streets, and there wasn't a whole lot of protective barriers and things like that. And so drivers were getting killed, spectators were getting killed, and he pushed for those, sort of closed off races, which in turn helped create this event. Now that you were going to, it wasn't like you're going out of your house and you're, on the street corner and they're going to whiz by. Now we're going to go to the speedway. And now we're going to be at an event, and then here's going to be this larger than life, all tarted up guy. That's a part of what this experience is.
Yeah, and he knew the power that he had in the sport, right, where he could demand a lot of these changes that the sport was really resistant to making, and he boycotted a number of races until they corrected some of these tracks and better equipped the medical team. And so, it seems like the style and the fashion is oftentimes self-serving, but in this case, he used that ability and that power to really influence and change the sport for the better.
Yeah, and not just was he the most recognizable and the most fashionable and the most marketable, he was the best driver. So that always helps. Because when he retired with his 27 wins, 43 podiums, 3 championships, he was the most successful F1 driver ever. When he retired with that amount of wins, so you put all of the off-track things on with the on-track, and you get somebody with the power that Jackie Stewart had, and I'm sure we'll revisit him in the future.
Yeah, and then speaking of sort of power that an image can have in a sport where someone mixes this sort of style and recognition along with skill, FloJo, right? She really went in another direction that you didn't see at the time with, track stars, and her signature long nails that she often painted with something, American flag or some sort of homage to the Olympics, or maybe something subtle like, palm trees, and she was really influential, not just in her skill, but in showing that an African-American woman could be on the biggest global stage at the top of her sport, and she could go and carve out her own image. And that could be a powerful thing, and she could really show what, Black femininity and beauty and power, all mixed together could really achieve.
Yeah, and it went beyond just that. I think that a lot of times that she gets stuck in, like, what did she mean to Black women? But I think that she's way bigger than that. She's like, what did she mean to women? And what did she mean to female athletes? Because particularly in her sport, you're going through the 70s and the 80s, and there's all of, the kind of snickering and the jokes and the, the East German and the Russian and, how much testosterone is everyone taking? And there was that overhanging cloud over the sport. And here's somebody that brought a tremendous amount of femininity to everything that she did, because she looked like $1 million when she stepped on the track, and she looked like $1 million, getting out of the car and at a red carpet event. And that all went hand in hand, that she was going to say, I can be my own boss, and I can develop my own uniform, and I can develop my own style, and then I can package it and sell it. And that's something that, we didn't really see with female athletes, with the exception of tennis players, the Chris Everts of the world, or Tracy Austin. They had sort of been afforded that opportunity to be, a Revlon girl or whatnot. And here now we're seeing it expanded to other sports. Because of somebody like FloJo, who is unmistakable when she would step onto the track.
Yeah, she said she treated the track like a runway.
Mm-hmm.
And, viewers would tune in because they wanted to emulate her style as much as her skill. And they wanted to see what was she wearing. And she designed, as you mentioned, she designed all of her own uniforms and outfits. She was kind of her signature asymmetrical sort of bodysuit with the one legging.
Mm-hmm.
That was all her doing with vivid colors, often fuchsia or lime or some bright color, and really she stood out and created this her own style and her own image that really, like you said, it really carried a lot further than just what was on the track.
And if you watch a track meet now, you'll see markings of FloJo everywhere
Chicago.
because like there's so many people they wear, and it's men too. They'll wear compression sleeves while they're running. Like, what is that about? It's about fashion. Gabby Thomas always says, well, she does it because it reminds her to drive her arm up out of the starting blocks. But people wear them because it looks cool. Look at Asia Wilson. Like she always wears the one leg in the WNBA. That came from FloJo.
Yeah.
I know she's like, oh, well, it helps keep my leg warm and blah, blah, blah. But it comes from FloJo. Like the idea, the spark, they'll be like, hey, well, how would people react to this? Oh, they're going to be cool because it was cool to FloJo. So
Yeah.
she was awesome. And then she was good on top of it. And it's unfortunate that there's still a lot of people that question whether or not her record is legal. You can have all the questions you want in the world about was the wind gauge working and was it wind legal. Those are arguments and perspectives that are fair. But for the people that still think that she was a PED user, she was tested more than any other athlete for a long, long time. And even on her autopsy when she passed away, there was nothing that they found on her autopsy that had connected her anywhere to any of the nonsense that was going on in the 80s. So I think she gets an unfair rap because of how good she was, particularly in 1988. Even though the wind gauge conspiracy, there may be some truth to that it was a little bit wind dated, even if the official instruments say it was not.
Well, I just want to address that before we conclude because she wasn't as dominant in '84. She took a hiatus and a break from the sport. We call it a mental break now, right? That's the fashionable term. But she did step away from the sport, and she reevaluated her skill set. She relooked at her game. She returned in 1987, and that's when she really got dominant. And there's been a lot of players in a lot of sports who take that mental break and come back and reevaluate things that are even better. And, that could have been, I think one of the arguments is that, well, how could she have been so good so late in her life in terms of track athletes? But, there's some precedent there for that people taking that mental break and coming back stronger.
And she also changed coaches from Bobby Kersey
right.
to Al Joyner. That happened as well. The thing, like I said, I don't think that there was any shenanigans in terms of PEDs with her. And even if she did take human growth hormone, it wasn't banned until 1990. So it's not even a thing, even if she did. But I don't think she did anyway. But even if she did, it wouldn't be a problem. She was a victim of Ben Johnson in 1988, so that there were extra people looking at her at the time. But where the wind issue comes in is that the wind gauge read 0.0, which is almost impossible because there's almost always something. And it should have been like, even if it was almost nothing, it should have read like 0.1 or 0.2. And the fact that 30 feet away on the triple jump ramp, it was like 4.3. So that leads you to believe that perhaps the wind gauge wasn't working or was malfunctioning. Now, Omega, who ran the wind gauge, told the IAAF that everything was working fine. The IAAF investigated and it cleared it. So for all intents and purposes, it was zero. It was wind legal. That's another conversation. But she did come back with a wind legal run the next day that would still be tied for the world record now.
Yeah.
So she was legit. Love FloJo.
All right. Clayton, it's also legit. You're legit. We're going to conclude there.
Nice.
we're going to wrap it up. Thanks for joining me as always. For everyone out there, if you love history and want to learn more, check out our social media. It's always a new history post every day. We always wrap up those history posts at the end of each week with a podcast like this. Remember to follow us on your favorite or not so favorite social media at Sports History SL. That's Sports History in the letter S, the letter L for Sports and Leisure. You can find us at Blue Sky, Instagram, Substack, X, and YouTube. And on Facebook, we're still at Sports and Leisure. Follow us along, share the history. We love sharing it. We love talking about it. And we love hearing from you. All right, Clayton, thanks so much.
All right, thanks, guys. And to all the Brits who were upset at me for an hour and 20 minutes ago, remember, I still mostly like you. We'll see you next week.
Okay, thanks.